Welcome back to Black News Tonight. As we discussed before the break, a new report released just yesterday details how the federal government targeted the movement to defend Black lives last summer, intending to disrupt and discourage Black organizing for justice. Well, now we're going to continue this important conversation. We're going to unpack this whole thing. First, we gave you some reporting. We gave you the latest news. We told you exactly what came out of the report. And now I want to introduce my next two guests who are going to give us some insight historically, but also give us an analysis on the ground for what this means for people who right now are fighting for justice. Dr. Peniel Joseph is joining me. He's a historian, and he's also a professor of public affairs and director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the University of Texas, Austin. And Ash-Lee Woodard Henderson is an activist. She's with the Movement for Black Lives and also the co-executive director of the Highlander Research and Education Center. I want to thank you both for joining me on Black News Tonight. Ash-Lee, I want to start with you. You're an activist. You're on the ground. You're in the streets. When you hear this news, right, or get this reporting, and I know it wasn't a shocker to your system, but when you got the news that kind of confirmed that the government has been targeting people just like you for for exercising your constitutional rights to protest and to organize, how did you react?
Yeah, I mean, I was livid, Mark, and I'm sure many of our colleagues all across the country, the 27 million people that were in the streets last year, were also upset that the very thing that we were fighting to defend, democracy in the United States and liberation for Black people and all people in relationship to us and our communities, were actually being targeted by the federal government. What you said in the previous segment was exactly right. This report made us feel not as crazy and paranoid as the state attempted to make us feel in response to what we were experiencing in terms of white supremacist and state-sanctioned backlash to our movement. What this is just a confirmation with quantitative data to the qualitative stories that we have been living for generations that said that the federal government is overreaching and power grabbing at the expense of those of us that are expressing dissent about oppressive systems that need to be abolished. And so I'm proud to stand in solidarity with the Movement for Black Lives as we out this information and as we continue to build a solidarity movement that is rooted in our values about beloved community that actually fights and wins the end of police terrorism in this country.
Peniel Joseph, on the website for the Struggle for Power report, there's a timeline, right? And this timeline goes back to 1910, and it details the government's efforts to disrupt Black freedom and justice movements. This history seems important to understand. Why is this historical backdrop so important?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mark. Yeah, I think the historical context is unbelievably important. J. Edgar Hoover, even before becoming head of the FBI, infiltrated through a Black agent Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. And that's how Garvey was arrested in 1924. And it didn't lead to the end of Garveyism, but certainly there was a decline in the movement's effectiveness after Marcus Mosiah Garvey was arrested and deported. That history shows us a few things. One, that we don't actually live in the kind of thriving, robust democracy the country also always claims it to be, right? So in Haiti, where my people are from, you've got Tonton Macoute and a secret police that cause havoc and terror historically. And in the United States, you have it too. We call it the police, we call it the FBI, we call it these different law enforcement, these different names. And certainly we all know about the counterintelligence program, the COINTELPRO program that led to not just the murders of Black Panthers and people like Fred Hampton, but they also spied on civil rights activists. They spied on the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Ella Bakers and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Stokely Carmichaels. So there's a long history of this. I would say that in the 1970s, because of the Church Committee, the United States tried to come to terms post-Watergate with the FBI serving as a secret police that was investigating anti-racist activists, that was investigating anti-war activists. But post-September 11th, I think we've ratcheted this up once again. This doesn't mean it ended in the 70s. In the 1980s, there were activists against apartheid in South Africa that were investigated by the FBI. So this idea, like Ashley was saying, of building the beloved community, we're not going to get there when our own government investigates people who are actually trying to do good and refuses to investigate white supremacist groups that are flourishing. When we think about Southern Poverty Law Center and all the data that we've seen since 2008, white supremacy has gone way, way up in terms of flourishing. The movement for Black Lives is a movement for radical democracy. It's a movement to try to expand the ideals of the founding mothers and fathers into something that actually makes sense for all of us, whether we're Black or queer or Muslim or able-bodied or non. And to investigate those people really shows you that we have a sick society. And that's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said that America was a sick society, sick with the disease of racism. And King pushed back against critics who said that he had a problem. He said, I'm only the physician diagnosing the disease. I didn't cause the illness.
Absolutely.
But until we face up to this, we're never going to be able to eradicate it.
And just so y'all understand the context of this, right? Again, I mean, COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover, he wasn't just spying on Martin Luther King. He literally wanted Martin Luther King to kill himself. He literally wrote letters to Martin King to attempt to get him to be so ashamed that he would kill himself. These people aren't just surveilling you historically. They've wanted to destroy movements. They've wanted Black people to murder each other. And so while the report doesn't say that, let's not disconnect the report from a long history of government overreach, which isn't just about being extra careful or tapping the phone, which is problematic, but this leads to Black death. Ash-Lee, you see the reports now. You already know the data. You already got the experience. When you hear all of this, some demands have to be made. We got to be asking for something on the ground when we realize the government has been spying on us. What kind of demands should be made now in light of this new development?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a survivor of white supremacist violence that we know is not being investigated to its fullest, we know that this is a particular attack that is attempting to scare folks away from this fight to bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice. We did not see the same level of intervention with anti-mask protests that turned violent. We did not see the same level of surveillance on white supremacists. Some people would call it supremacy. I don't think there's anything supreme about whiteness. So I would say white psychopathy that actually really attempted to take over this country and stop the 27 million people that mobilized from protesting to voting. And so there absolutely are demands, Mark. The first demand is to pass the Breathe Act, right? The omnibus bill, the legislative love letter from the Movement for Black Lives that divest resources from these harmful and failing structures of the criminal legal system that is just a punitive bureaucracy to harm and create profit off of the incarceration of our people, that rips apart families. We want to take those resources, our taxpayer dollars, and invest those in building healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. So the first demand is to pass the Breathe Act. And if you haven't seen it, you can go to breatheact.org. The second demand is to actually create amnesty for all protesters, right? All of the folks that have been targeted by the surveillance of the state, all of the folks that have been criminalized for actually practicing democracy live and in living color deserve their freedom. They deserve their freedom. They deserve to not be waiting to see if they're going to be ripped apart from their communities, ripped apart from their families. They deserve amnesty. So that's the second demand. And last but certainly not least, we need to abolish the Joint Terrorism Task Force that is being used to criminalize and surveil Black protest movements. It is time, good people. And so those are the three demands that are coming out of this study. And for folks that haven't yet seen it, you can go to m4bl.org/power, or you can text power, the word power, to 90975.
Absolutely. Those are concrete demands. And as the great Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. We're going to make the demand on the ground. We're going to make the demand in the voting booth. We're going to make the demand on TV every single night here on Black News Tonight. And everybody, I promise you, we will keep following this development. The government surveilling Black organizations, Black movements for freedom and justice, trying to undermine our ability to use our free speech rights, our rights to protest, our rights to organize. We cannot allow that to happen, and we are going to cover this. This is a scandal, quite frankly. Anyway, Peniel, Ash-Lee, thank you so much for joining me on Black News Tonight. Everybody stay with us here. We got a lot more coming up tonight, including actor Lodrick D. Collins, who's going to join me to talk about portraying the legendary Smokey Robinson in the new film respect. But first, I'm going to take you to my conversation with Grammy Award winning producer Swizz Beatz. You don't want to miss it.